We are about to delve into a passage which has mystified rabbis and sages and theologians up until this point. So don't think that I'm really going to unlock something earth-shattering or world-changing because no one can really plumb the depths of this passage regarding the red heifer. The passage of the red heifer is so mysterious and it seems so paradoxical, so contradictory within our minds. It's extremely hard to unravel and to highlight and to explain and to understand and to disseminate all of the nuances and layers of meaning and symbolism and interpretation. So let's just tackle the biggest hurdle there is regarding the red heifer, which is, how can something that purifies someone contaminate the person who makes it? All right, let's get into the passage. So in Numbers chapter 19 is the chapter regarding the red heifer and the proper use of the red heifer. It says, Adonai spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, This is the statute of the Torah, which Adonai commanded, saying, Speak to Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, that they bring to you a flawless red heifer. So the community had to agree and pick a red heifer. It had to be flawless. According to rabbinic tradition, you cannot have two hairs that are a different color. If there's two hairs on this red heifer that is white or black or a different color, it is disqualified as being a flawless, pure red heifer. And so basically they had to inspect this red heifer extremely carefully. Now, the Temple Institute, which is already training the priesthood, they have all the garments made, they have all the furnishings made, minus the Ark of the Covenant, which I think they know where it is. They're just not telling anybody. They're waiting for the temple to be rebuilt. They're going through mock sacrifices and rituals so that when the temple is rebuilt, they can just go in and start right away. They have finally produced another pure red heifer. So they're going to make these ashes so they could do this ritual once again once the temple is rebuilt. So it says, they're to bring you a flawless red heifer on which there is no blemish. So see, the flawlessness is regarding the hairs, and the blemish is regarding the skin. There's no blemish on which has never been yoked. So it cannot have been worked or used for menial common purpose because it's holy from the get-go, separated from the beginning. Give it to Eleazar the Kohen, the priest. He shall take her outside the camp, slaughter her in his presence. So Eleazar is supervising. He doesn't actually do the slaughtering. Then Eleazar the Kohen is to take some of the blood on his finger and sprinkle it 7 times towards the front of the tent of meeting. That's the tabernacle. While watching, he is to burn the heifer, her hide, flesh, blood, refuse. The Kohen is to take some cedar wood, some hyssop, some scarlet yarn. These are the same ingredients that's used to cleanse and purify the priests and to cleanse and purify the leper. I think that's very interesting. So the cedar wood is an aromatic wood, and it represents covering up the smell of decay, which the red heifer is used to cleanse and purify from being contaminated by coming into contact with a corpse. So you have hyssop, which is used as an astringent, used as to cleanse a wound, to purify a wound. And then you have the scarlet wool, which represents sacrifice, which ultimately represents the blood of atonement. And cast them into the midst of the burning heifer. Afterwards, the Kohen is to wash his clothes and bathe his flesh with water, and afterward he may come back into the camp. So basically, in preparing these ashes that purify somebody from contamination via a corpse, in the process of making this, it actually contaminates the person and makes them unclean, and they have to go through a cleansing ritual. Still, the Kohen will be unclean until evening. Also, the one burning is to wash his clothes. So the Kohen never even came in contact with anything except for the blood, because he used that to sprinkle the tabernacle. He just supervised, and yet he became unclean. And the person that did the slaughtering and the person that did the burning, they're unclean. Verse 8, also The one burning is to wash his clothes and bathe his flesh in water, and he will be unclean until evening. A clean man, so somebody totally different who's never been in the process of producing these ashes of the red heifer, is to gather up the ashes of the heifer, put them in a clean place outside the camp. They are to be for the community of the Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, to use as pure water of purification for sin. The one who gathers the heifer's ashes is also to wash his clothes. So now he becomes ritually impure, ritually unclean, as well as be unclean till evening. And it will be a permanent statute for the children of Israel and for the outsider living among them. Okay, one law for the Hebrew, and one and the same law for the resident alien, for the one who is living among the children of Israel. So God's not playing favorites here. Okay, so now this is what makes a person unclean, that requires the ashes, the red heifer, to be used. It says, verse 11, whoever touches any dead body will be unclean for 7 days. Now, why don't we do this or go through this now? Well, number one, we don't live in Israel. Number two, the temple is not standing. Number three, there is not a working priesthood. Therefore, there is no reason, to use the ashes of the red heifer. Fourthly, we don't even know where the ashes of the red heifer are. They've been lost, so now we have to produce new ashes, which is in the process of happening through the Temple Institute. So, basically, when somebody became unclean by contamination through a corpse, the reason they had to be purified is so that they could attend rituals and participate in rituals and community worship at the tabernacle. You couldn't come to the tabernacle, or you made the tabernacle unclean. So it says, whoever touches any dead body will be unclean for 7 days. He is to purify himself on the 3rd and on the 7th day. So he's to immerse in water, a mikvah, a baptism, if you will. Then he will be clean. But if he does not purify himself on the 3rd and 7th day, he will not be clean. Anyone touching the dead body of a man who does not purify himself defiles Adonai's tabernacle. So it makes the tabernacle unclean, right? And the person will be cut off from Israel. Because the cleansing water was not sprinkled on him, he is unclean, and his uncleanness will remain on him. This is the Torah, this is the law, this is the commandment. This is the regulation, if you will, for whenever a person dies in a tent. So they die in an enclosed area. Anyone entering the tent or anyone inside the tent will be unclean 7 days. Any open container not having a lid fastened on it will also be unclean. Because we don't know what the person died of. Could be a airborne contagious disease, right? So this is all safety protocol. Anyone out in an open field who touches a dead body, whether killed by the sword, meaning in warfare, or by natural causes, or touches a human bone or a grave, so you don't even have to come in contact with the body itself, just a contact with a grave, going to a cemetery basically is enough to make somebody unclean. Verse 17, for the unclean one, they are to take some of the ashes of the burnt purification offering and pour some fresh water into a jar. Then a person will take some hyssop. This is kind of like a brush, like a paintbrush. You know how sometimes you wet a paintbrush and you can sling that water from the brush? It's kind of the same principle here. Then a clean person will take some hyssop, dip it in the water, and sprinkle it on the tent and all the furnishings and the people who were there, as well as the one touching the bone, the one killed, the corpse, or the grave. Verse 19, the clean person will sprinkle the unclean on the 3rd and 7th day. He is to purify himself on the 7th day, and on the 7th day he is to wash his clothes, bathe himself in water, and in the evening he will be clean. So why the evening? Because in Hebraic thought, the evening is the start of a new day, not midnight. However, the man who is unclean but does not purify himself will be cut off from the community. He has defiled the sanctuary of Adonai. Since the cleansing water was not sprinkled on him, he is unclean. This will be a permanent ordinance for them. The one sprinkling the cleansing water is also to wash his clothes, and anyone touching the cleansing water will be unclean until evening. So the one who is actually performing the purification becomes unclean, even though he's using that water of purification to cleanse people who are unclean by contamination with a corpse. Just using the water and not being unclean yourself makes you unclean. See the paradox here? See the seeming contradiction? It's hard to understand, but we are going to try to unpack that in such a way that you will be able to understand the simplicity of it without going too deep into this subject. Okay. Anything touched by an unclean person becomes unclean, and anyone touching it will be unclean until evening. Okay, so I also want to read to you Haggai, chapter 2, verses 10 through 13, because this kind of, even back then, the people of the days of the prophets were just, they were very concerned and trying to understand and grasp the meaning of this whole clean and unclean thing. So it says, on the 24th day, in the 9th month, in the 2nd year of Darius, the word of Adonai came to Haggai the prophet. Thus says Adonai Zevaot, in other words, the Lord of hosts, the Lord of angel armies. Ask now the Kohanim, the priest, for a ruling. In other words, go and ask him a question and get a decision on this. Verse 12, if a person carries consecrated, that is holy meat, in the corner of his garment, and with his corner touches bread, stew, wine, oil, or any food, will it become holy too? So if you have something holy that you're carrying in your clothes, and those clothes come in contact with something else, does that holiness transfer? Then the Kohanim answered and said, no. Verse 13, so Haggai said, if one who is unclean by contact with a corpse, and we learned that that requires the cleansing of the ashes of the red heifer, right? If anyone who is unclean by contacts with a corpse touches any of these things, does it become unclean? So if you have something unclean on you, does the uncleanness transfer by touch? So the Kohanim answers and says, it does become unclean. Okay, well, why doesn't having something holy transfer? You see the issue here, you see the problem. This is a paradox. Now, a paradox is a statement that seems to be contradict itself, but is nonetheless true. A paradox is a person or a thing or a situation that inhibits inexplicable, boy, I'm tongue-tied today, or contradictory aspects. Number 3, it's a statement that is self-contradictory or logically unattainable, though based on valid deduction from an acceptable premise. So this whole ashes of the red heifer is a paradox. So why does the person who actually helped make or produce the ashes of the red heifer to make somebody who is unclean by contacts with a corpse, why do they become unclean? And why does the use of the water on an unclean person make that person clean? Okay, so think of it this way. Think of the ashes of the red heifer like a sponge. So like a sponge, the red heifer absorbs the contamination of the people, if you will. So using the ashes or producing the ashes of the red heifer absorbs the contamination of the people. So when a sponge absorbs something that's been spilled on the floor, whether it be, stew juice or blood or pet mess, whatever, so the floor becomes clean, or whatever you're cleaning with the sponge becomes clean because the uncleanness is absorbed. But the person holding the sponge, the cleaning agent itself, becomes unclean because once a sponge is full, it can't absorb anymore. It has to release what has been absorbed. So you wring out a sponge, and therefore you get the contaminant on your hand when you're wringing it out or when you're holding it. So this is kind of the same with the ashes of the red heifer. So let me kind of say that again. Like a sponge, the red heifer absorbs the contamination of the people. But if the clean person handles the sponge, there is nothing to absorb, and so the contaminations are released on the person holding the sponge. So, and also think of it this way. Back in the day when somebody feels that they have been poisoned or something they ate made them sick, and they were out in the bush or in the wilderness and they had no conventional medicines to use, what they would do is they would eat charcoal. And charcoal would absorb whatever poison or contaminant that was in your system. Now, you could even go to the drugstore today and buy activated charcoal tablets. So that's what I use whenever I feel sick or get a stomach ache or didn't eat something that was quite right. And usually I feel better. So you think of what the red heifer has become. The red heifer has become ash. So similarly, it absorbs just like charcoal. So hopefully this kind of helped you understand this paradoxical idea of the red heifer, why the person using it, making it, becomes unclean, but yet they're able to cleanse somebody else who has been unclean because they've been in contact in contact with a corpse. So this is one of these mysteries that there's still so much depth and meaning, and so much more ground we can cover, so many more things we can explain, but that is just beyond the scope and the focus of this little drosh, this little sermonette, if you will. But I know a lot of people have a lot of questions about the mystery of the ashes of the red heifer. So I thought I would give this very simplistic explanation so you can understand the overall concept and premise of what the ashes of the red heifer are all about. Guys, thanks so much for listening. Go out there and have a great day. Shalom and God bless.